India is a continent, a subcontinent. I lived there for 3 years. It's very difficult to make generalizations about India. One of the most important things in the health sector is the role of the states. So in India, what we can see here is that of all government spending, around 2/3 is by state governments, and around 1/3 comes from the national government. I'm going to show you quickly some health data. Some of you may have seen this. I've never used this before in a presentation, but this is something which is free online. It's called Gapminder. Anybody can find this. And what this shows is, again, on the horizontal axis is how rich a country is, the income per person. And on the vertical axis is the life expectancy. And what we can do, we have India here in blue. The bigger the circle is, the bigger the population. So here we have India. This big red one is China. Towards the top here we have the United States and a few other countries. So what I can do is I can run this, and what we see is we're starting in the year 1900, and we can run it up to the present day. And this just takes, it's very useful for comparative analysis. You can see in the 1930s and 40s, if I stop it there, I mean, India has already seen some health improvements, even though its income has not increased particularly. And similarly, this is 1983, and again, there's been quite some increases in life expectancy without major increases in income. China is a little bit ahead there. And then in the 1990s, you can see India continues it. There's a shift to the right there, so the income has grown. It still lags behind here. I think we have here Nicaragua. So it's interesting that on this chart, the present day, the wealth of India is similar to Nicaragua, but Nicaragua, okay, here, India, life expectancy is 64, and Nicaragua there is 73. So quite a big difference. And somewhere down here is Moçmabic, one of these. And there's one other quick chart. This looks at infant mortality. And again, if we run it quickly, this is India here, running through the 1930s. Not a lot of change into the 1950s. And then you can see 1970s there, it starts to drop. Still quite a lot behind China. So anyway, I think this is, I won't spend too much long on this, but this is a free tool which is actually very useful. In fact, we use it a lot to compare countries at similar levels of wealth. So actually looking vertically is quite interesting. So why, for example, does in Nicaragua the same level of wealth have much lower infant mortality than India? And health financing has some relevance to this. So let's look a little bit more at the reliance on out-of-pocket spending. How does India compare with other countries? As I mentioned already, public spending is extremely low in India, and this really is pushing up a heavy reliance on out-of-pocket spending. This is comparison with a number of other countries, and persistently high. Very little change really over the last 13, 14 years. So how much does the government allocate of the government's budget? How much does it give for the health sector? This really is an indication of the priority which a government gives to health. We really focus on these issues. It's very easy to go to a country and say, you should spend more money, you should spend more money, and in a sense, that's not enough to say that. You need to construct some very clear arguments. And I think what's clear, I've tried to show here, is that it's going to be very difficult to see some real improvements in coverage and some health outcomes unless you start to see some significant increases in public spending. Any country which relies heavily on people paying out of their pocket almost always see these high link between getting sick and getting pushed into poverty. So this is how much India spends. We have, again, all this data is from World Health Organization, our databases. And okay, in 2008, just over 4% of the government budget, the total government budget, was given to the health sector. And it hasn't changed much over this time period. If we compare that with some other countries, this is India at the bottom here. It's extremely low. This is a major issue. There is progress that can be made in terms of how you spend the money. I'm focusing on the revenue collection element here. Improvements in the way money is pooled, improvements in the way it is spent, can certainly make a difference. But there are real limits when you look at the big picture. If you focus on the big picture, unless India really starts to tackle some of its commitment, its public commitment to the health sector, I think there's going to be limited improvements in terms of coverage. Again, this is the same information. It just gives some comparative data. For example, Vietnam is spending almost 9%, China over 10% of its budget on health, and India remains very low, below 4%. This translates, of course, into real money. I've been talking about percentages, but this chart compares India, which is classified as a lower middle income country. This compares India with other lower middle income countries. And again, you can see that the blue is India, the red is the average for all lower middle income countries. And again, you can see the absolute levels of health spending remain quite low, just over $30 US, and way below the average for low middle income countries. In 2009, WHO did a report and it estimated that in order to adequately fund a set of essential services focusing on MDGs and health systems, and this is for low-income countries actually, that on average around $42 per capita was required, and this would increase to $65 by 2015. That's for low-income countries. I don't have the figure for middle-income countries, but clearly India is spending way below what it needs to.